All right, so today is going to be kind of a more of a conversation about water and less a in-depth. We're going through all the diseases and everything. We are going to be more story time, more storytelling. So hopefully that is okay. But we're looking to cover like where's water coming from in Arizona. We'll talk about some of the diseases, but I also definitely want to talk about solutions because I think we all have that climate anxiety of like, what are we doing? Water's going away, the world's coming to an end. So hopefully we can address some of those issues as well. So here's the objectives. Why is an emergency physician talking about water? Because I love water. I'm really into water. I listen to podcasts on water. I listen to stuff from municipal utilities. I've done rainwater harvesting and gray water at my own house. And I've served like with some water conservation groups on their board of directors and worked in that realm for probably now 12 plus years. So I am big into water. And so that's kind of my background and why I'm doing this and why I'm super passionate about it. So if we just take water in general, right? Why is water important? Well, we know water makes up probably 70 to 80% of our bodies, depending on our hydration status, but also most of our planet's covered in water, right? 70% of the planet is water. Unfortunately, only 3% of that is actually fresh water. And of that, only 0.4% of the total water on this planet is accessible and drinkable. And this includes mostly surface water. So about 80% of that drinkable water on this planet that's accessible. So non-accessible water would be like polar ice caps or areas that are polluted. That's non-accessible fresh water. But of that is mainly surface water. So most of our water we drink and use as humans comes from surface water. And in the North America, about 84% of that comes from the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes actually make up about a fifth of all of the world's surface water. So we are very well endowed here in the United States in terms of surface water and access to water. So knowing that water is in our bodies, knowing that water is all around us, I want to introduce the concept of a one water concept. So the one water concept is that all water is the same water. So whether that's recycled water or storm water or rainwater or city water or groundwater or surface water, all the water is the same. We used to silo these things, like, oh, I'm only at the utility. I work only in delivering clean water. Oh, no, I'm just the wastewater plant. I only clean water. I'm a sewer water person. People divided those up, but it's actually the same water and it's just reused. Things are reused and recycled constantly. The water we're drinking today is the same water that was in the trenches in World War I, and it was the same water that dinosaurs urinated out millions of years ago. We're using the same water. It's just changed in form and location. So when we talk about a one water concept, we want to be able to access water, right? We want it, whether it's groundwater or rainwater or coming from a reservoir, and we're putting that into a treatment plant. We're then sending out clean water into our environment. Maybe it's used for green infrastructure. Maybe it's for domestic use. Maybe it's for industrial or commercial use. And then after those uses, it's probably having some dirty water that needs to come back and be cleaned. Some of that water can be cleaned and then resent out without being fully cleaned. Some can recharge our aquifers. Some can go back to a reservoir, and some just is wasted totally. But it's this constant cycle that it's not it's not an extraction economy. It's not a death economy of water. It's kind of a life or circular economy when you think about water. So we're using water and then we're replenishing that in a constant cycle. And that's what we want to do. So we talk about water in Tucson, right? How much water do we get? We get 12 inches of rainwater a year. We are a desert, but we get more water than Southern California gets. But they don't always consider themselves a desert, but they are a desert. 13 inches if you go on the east side of town. There's a little bit more rain, probably from proximity to mountains, but you can see that the landscape may be a little bit greener in certain parts of town. So 12 to 13 inches in rainwater is what we get every year. That is enough water, if we captured it, to supply all the needs for Tucson. Which, if you think about that, we don't need the Colorado River water. We don't need other water. We just need to capture the water that's here. The same goes for Atlanta. So Atlanta has enough rainwater to supply all of its residents. But right now it's shipping in water from Tennessee and Kentucky, and it is looking to even build a canal or conduit from the Great Lakes to bring water down to Atlanta. So we're not the only, city or town that this is an issue for, but we have to capture the water we have. Right now, we just let it run off and we let it go down to Marana and it's used in cotton fields. So there's better ways to use that water to put it in our ground aquifers and reuse it. So we took a look at Tucson, historically, and this is representative in many parts of Arizona, right? This is the bottom of a mountain in the 1900s. You can see there's a perennial stream. The Santa Cruz River here is running, and it would run year round. It's not going to run like the Mississippi River. The Mississippi, right, big, huge flows all the time. Our rivers in Arizona in the Southwest fluctuate based on the season and snow melt and rain and precipitation, but they always would have a little bit of flow. It would get bigger in the monsoons and bigger in the spring when the snows would melt. You can notice the trees and green infrastructure that's even there, the natural cycle, right? All those trees lead to a cooling, inviting environment at that time. But we humans, we think we know better, right? So we started in the early 1900s saying, hey, we got this really cool technology called pipes, and we can pipe water and pump water and move it wherever we want. And then we can irrigate things and we can create new farmland, which was a big issue, right? Do we have new farmland? Yes, we can create it. We did it in the Southwest all over the place. If you look in Colorado and Arizona and the Imperial Valley in California, all these areas are very fertile lands, but did not have water. Now we have pumped water to them, and now we have created great growing areas, but they are not natural growing areas. And we are growing things that don't normally grow, right? The normal cycle of agriculture was to grow it in a place where the climate was appropriate for the crop you were growing. You would be based upon the water and the weather of the time, and then that would determine your yield or how your crop went. This was saying, nope, we can take irrigation and put it wherever we want and grow whatever we want. So this creates a problem, right? This leads us to a mountain today. We don't have the trees. We don't have the perennial flows. We have lowered the water table because we've overpumped the amount of water in the Southwest. And so we have spread that water around and used it. And a lot of water, when you're spraying it in irrigation, goes into the air and is evaporated and then moves by air currents to other parts of the planet. So this is our status today. So to understand kind of where all this water is going, where it's coming from, we want to understand the whole water system is very integrated, right? You have wells, you're pumping water out of the ground. You're at the same time recharging the water into the ground, whether it's a river that slowly allows water to go and raise the water table, whether maybe it's an irrigated agricultural land, maybe it's rain runoff. So you're in this constant pumping of the aquifer or the water table and lowering the water table and constantly replenishing it. And that push and pull should be a natural net zero cycle, or hopefully putting more water in than you're pulling out. But if you're pulling out more than you're putting in, the water table and aquifers are going to be depleted, which then leads you to less water you have access to. So if we talk about Arizona's water supply, where does Arizona get its water currently? So 36% is coming from the Colorado River. We have other in-state rivers. We used to have more, but they are now going dry. But the current 4 that you can still get water from include the Gila, the Salt, the Agua Fria, and the Verde. Groundwater pumping is a major source. And then reclaimed water is only 5%. This was 3%, but now has gone up to 5%. So that's where we're getting our current water for use. So to understand kind of the next few sections, I want to just introduce the concept of a watershed. So a watershed is an area of geography that basically any rainwater that lands there will flow into a common stream, lake, river, or ocean. So it's, in a sense, if you took the United States, right, we talk about the continental divide. One goes to the one ocean, one goes to the other ocean. Those are ginormous watersheds. If we talk about watersheds, they can be as small as a creek or a little valley. but you can also do a whole major river like the Mississippi, the Colorado, the Nile. Any major river would have a huge watershed. And these have their own environmental impacts and their own environment based on what that watershed is like. So if we look here in Tucson, we have multiple watersheds, right? And they're all based on our streams and creeks and washes that flow. So on the left part of the screen, you can see this is coming from the south, is the Santa Cruz River, comes from south. It comes from Mexico. It's one of the few rivers that actually crosses borders twice. So it starts in Arizona, goes south into Mexico, makes a U-turn and heads north, and then eventually empties out into the Colorado River watershed, which we're going to talk about. But the Santa Cruz is our major water coming river that comes up. That was the one I showed you in the pictures. We have other ones. We have the Pantano Wash out here on the side. We have the Agua Caliente and Tanque Verde creeks. They run together and meet up with the Pantano, and they become the Rito River. So the Rito then flows into the Santa Cruz. Each of those major flows has small watersheds, and the creeks and the washes that you see as you're driving around town, those all flow and are basically, magnifying the effect and why they get down to a creek or river. So those are kind of small and macro watersheds. So now let's take a look at this big watershed, which you guys hear about in the news, which is kind of the Colorado River Basin. So we're going to talk about this from a historical perspective, but to understand some of the history, I think we need to understand some prior law that has now dictate law and current court cases that are going on. So the first two water concepts of legal concern are prior appropriation and riparian. These are the two bases of kind of water law and how things are dictated. Prior appropriation is a Western United States principle. It's a first in time, first in right, meaning if you were the first person on that water, you had the first claim to it. And this was, you could take as much water as was of beneficial use. So whether that's an industry, an agricultural purpose, your house use, but you could take as much as you wanted, and the second, third, and fourth people that had claim could not infringe on the first person's right. So hopefully that makes sense. So first person in, this was a water scarcity principle, right? There's a limited amount of water in the Western United States. And this started when we had mining started in California, and miners said, I need water to run my mine and look for gold. And so they were trying to have water claims. And so this principle was brought up as a prior appropriation. I had a water claim to this. These water rights can be bought, sold, inherited. And if you don't use your water, you can lose it. So if you as the first person don't use all your water that you claim, the next person can take that. Or if you stop using it, they would get senior water rights if you stop using your water. The second concept is riparian. So riparian water rights refer to Old English common law and is used in the rest of the United States. And it's based on water for reasonable and beneficial purposes. So this is not to hurt other riparian owners. So in a sense, if there is a stream or creek and you have property on one side and I have property on the other side, we both have ownership and can take water that's beneficial to us. We're using this mainly for domestic use. So livestock, agriculture, cooking, bathing, that is your priority. But I can't take all the water. I still have to let you have that to do your domestic thing. Domestic stuff takes precedence over non-domestic. So that would be like industry, mining, excessive agriculture that I'm going to sell, not just personal use. And so these rights are tied to the land ownership. If you don't own the land that's next to the creek, you don't have any water rights to that. So it's not a first in, first out principle. So as these principles had been around for a while, but they started to really coalesce in 1876 when Colorado instituted prior appropriation into their constitution. So the doctrine of prior appropriation entering their constitution became the first time that this became in law in the West, and then created precedent for other water law cases. And so this was because Colorado themselves were worried about water scarcity and wanting to claim water, saying that they had access to the river and they had an important claim to it. Some of this started then in the late 1800s, early 1900s. A federal report comes out and says, you know what, I think we may need to build a dam because California's population is getting bigger and we need to protect the right of California to get some water. So this put a lot of other Western states kind of on alert, and they were worried about this. And so they got together in 1922 and said, we need to come up with a plan so that California doesn't just take all our water with this dam. Now, California had a lot of federal power at the time because proportionally they had a higher population than the other states, so they had a higher percentage of control in Congress. So they could exert that political power for these processes. So in 1922, there was a Colorado attorney named Carpenter, and he was elected to negotiate this interstate compact between the states involved in the basin. And when we talk about the Colorado River Basin, that is the same as the Colorado River watershed. So you'll see that with the black-gray outline, and you can see the states it involves. So even though the Colorado River does not run in Wyoming or New Mexico, they are part of the Colorado River watershed, so they are included in these water right claims. So in this, when we talk about 1922, they got together and they figured something out, and they said, here's what we're going to do. The compromise was we are going to divide into an upper and lower basin states. The upper basin making up Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico. The lower basin, California, Arizona, and Nevada. And they said, all right, the compromise, they said, each of you determine what your allocation of water is going to be. We are going to determine that each basin gets 7.5 million acre feet of water a year. You ask what a million acre feet. So imagine acre feet is a common water term that we use for agricultural reasons. And you would basically imagine an acre of land and you fill it a foot high of water. That is an acre foot. So if you have a million acre feet, it's a million acres a foot high of water. So it's a common usage term for how much irrigation a crop would need or how much water you need for that amount of land. So they divided it 7.5 for a total of 15 million acre feet, with the concept that there are 16 million acre feet flowing each year through the Colorado River. There was a plus factor to compromise with Arizona and California in the lower basin. They had a 1 million acre feet that they could increase. So in a sense, they were going on the premise that we'll take all 16 million acre feet, we'll divide that up. Unfortunately, the actual flow is 13 million acre feet, and that varies from 4 to 22 acre feet over a period of time. So right away from this compact, right, we created a sense of we are taking more water than we are actually is flowing in the river. So already we are at a deficit in terms of water use going on. So as this compact gets signed in 1922, great, within 5 months, all the states except for Arizona sign it. So Arizona is concerned because they start hearing some reports that there's this Boulder Canyon project and that's going to get approved. And if that gets approved, there's going to be a Hoover Dam built and an All-American Canal. I love the names, right? An All-American Canal. We can't have like a half-American canal. It was All-American. And so the All-American Canal is going to take water from the Colorado River across California and deliver it to Southern California, LA, and San Diego. Have you guys ever driven by the All-American Canal? If you go on 8, you'll drive it on the way to San Diego, you'll pass it, you'll see the All-American Canal out there. So and that's kind of what they're referencing in on this picture. You can see the orange lines are where these canals are. And then the yellow areas, the auxiliary areas, are areas that are taking water from those canals at a far distance or receiving water from those areas. So as these started to come up, Arizona was really getting frustrated and thinking like they're in trouble, they're going to lose some water. So they didn't sign this compact for 22 years until 1944. And then they signed the compact because they were noticing that central and southern Arizona were growing in population, and they needed to find a way to move water to those populations. And they figured if they did not sign the compact, they would not be included in creating a Central Arizona project, which is what it was future called, right? They wanted that canal. So 1944, they say, cool, we'll be on board. Let's start to negotiate and get this canal going. Now, one of the things you can look at the map, one of the parts that Arizona kept playing was saying, we have so many waterways in such a huge watershed of tributaries leading to the Colorado River, we expect a large percentage of water, especially compared to California, which doesn't have a large watershed that's flowing into the Colorado River. So these were arguments between Arizona and California that have been going on for many years. That also in 1944, we talked about, this all-American canal stuff. Well, the Americans, where does the Colorado River end up? It ends up in the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. Did we allocate any water to Mexico? No. So this was a problem, and the Mexican Water Treaty came out in 1944 as well, which involved the Colorado River and it involved the Rio Grande River. So it was water rights were going international now. And at the end of the Colorado River used to be a large delta, very similar to like New Orleans or Sacramento. You have these large deltas where large rivers flow out, and they have a nice ecological area. A lot of farming down in that area of Mexico as well. So these were all concerns. If we're taking out water, what's going to happen to the delta? What's going to happen to the farmers in Mexico? So 1944, those things come out. 1948, now we get into the upper basins. Now 24 years later, or 26 years later, deciding what their allocations are going to be, how they're going to divide it up. Now 1952, Arizona and California are still having difficulties. And so Arizona sues California. And this lawsuit is Arizona versus California, goes up to the Supreme Court. It takes 11 years to solve and $5 million in legal fees for the two states. And basically, it actually led to appropriations, but it also led to some things that the initial founders were concerned about. So the initial compact, when they did not want federal involvement, they wanted the states here to be local representatives and decide where the water went. Well, one of the issues that came out of the Arizona versus California decision was there was an interpretation by the Supreme Court that the lower Colorado Basin allocation will have a water master. The water master will be the Secretary of the Interior. So a cabinet position is, in a sense, the water master for the lower basin states who will apportion future surpluses or deficits. Obviously, because they couldn't figure it out, the Supreme Court said, fine, we'll take over and help you guys out. Now, also in this lawsuit, we talked about Mexico, we talked about American water. Well, there's these Native Americans who live along these lands too, which no one talked about in any of this. So maybe we should allocate some water for them. Part of this decision allocated for tribal lands and finally included Native Americans in these water issues. So this takes 11 years. 1963, finally, this decision comes down and the lower states get their apportionments and know what's happening. The All-American Canal gets signed off the Central Arizona Project in 1968. President Johnson signs the Colorado River Basin Project Act, which allows for construction of this to bring the water there. So a lot of history that took place that kind of led us to where we're at today. So if we start to look at like where the allocations are, and on this graphic, they switch the upper and lower basin states, but the numbers are correct. So California gets 4.6 million acre feet, 2.5 to Arizona, 0.3 to Nevada. Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah, you can see their grouping there. Mexico gets 1.5, and Native American lands get, I think, another 0.9 million acre feet. And you're like, well, where's all this water going? Like, who's taking this? Well, this is a lot of drinking water for people. There's a lot of hydroelectric that comes from this. So if you've ever seen the Hoover Dam or the Glen Glen Canyon Dam, a lot of hydropower there that goes. Las Vegas is a big user of electricity from there. And then there's a lot of like recreational areas and agriculture and wildlife that this is being distributed to. But those are kind of the appropriations of who gets what with the Colorado River Basin Compact. So kind of was a little quiet for a few years. And then we started like in 1995, the Arizona legislature says, well, I think, we've got the Central Arizona project, but if we don't pull and use all our water, California is taking it. So they created a concept in the legislature of a state water bank, where basically they could secure that 2.5 million acre feet, and they would take it all, and then they would put it in the ground as a bank deposit. So they would basically recharge the aquifers in Arizona. So maybe in a future year, instead of taking the water, say California wanted more water, sure, we've banked some of ours, we'll pull it out of the ground. You can take more and pay us for taking that extra water out of the California River. So this creates now a market for water. Phoenix and Tucson will occasionally bank or borrow each other's water, things like this. So it's its own market based on this bank concept that was created. 1998, the Colorado River stops flowing all the way to the Sea of Cortez. It no longer flows there. And in 2005, Lake Powell got to 33% of its capacity. And we started looking at water issues becoming more severe for this region. And from 2007 to 2019, they were looking at drought contingency plans and basically how to implement for a mega drought. We got to the point in 2021 where the US federal government actually had to come in and declare the first cuts for the basin, that everyone was going to get water cuts. And in 2022, Lake Powell was starting to raise concerns like, I don't think we can generate hydroelectric power because our levels are so low. So now it's a multiplicative, right? We're now affecting electricity as well as affecting water. And then last year, we had all the states were trying to look at this and re-agree to figure out what our cuts were going to be. They came up with a cut plan. 6 of the 7 states agreed, but California did not, because California in that plan would have to go from 4.4 million acre feet to 1 million acre feet. And they were not on board with a huge cut in their that footage. And so what they were looking at is that water mainly goes to the Imperial Valley. Do you guys know where the Imperial Valley is? Salton Sea area. So basically you can imagine El Centro, like Brawley, all these areas. And it's basically the southern agricultural area in California, produces a lot of crops. It was the bottom of a seabed floor, so it's got very good soil, but no water. So that Imperial Valley uses 3.1 million acre feet of the 4.6. And they do that, and they're generating a revenue of like $2.3 billion a year in agricultural. So this is a big economic issue that if they lost it. California said, well, how about instead of losing 3 million acre feet, how about we just cut 400,000 acre feet? And everyone's like, that's ridiculous. So then the Biden administration came in and said, all right, you're all being nonsensical. We're gonna cut you 25%, everybody off the top. And then they said, well, we don't really like that. So the third plan that they finally all agreed to was they would all do a 10% cut. And this is a temporary plan that they're currently working on today. This temporary plan goes in effect till 2026. And so they have a couple years for this compact to figure out what we're going to do next. So why is this of value? Why do we care about this water in these states in the Southwest? Well, it's always right. It's the economy, damn it. So there's a huge economic area is based on this water. This is specific use, indirect use, and everything. So 16 million jobs and a GDP of $1.5 trillion. This is out of an Arizona State study that looked at this. And you're like, well, is that a big GDP? That would be the 14th or 15th largest GDP in the world. So it's the equivalent of a GDP of Australia or Spain. That's how big the water is of value to this area. So of course it's a big issue, right? Of course people are fighting over this. This is a lot of money, which leads to jobs, which leads to political power. So where are we using our water in Arizona? So obviously agricultural use uses a lot of water. right? It's using the majority of our water. Municipal is like commercial, city, domestic stuff. And then industrial will be like a factory. So that's kind of our split in terms of where our water use is. If we look at like a domestic, so how is us as individuals or our patients, how are they using water? The average person in Tucson, the majority of your use will be outdoor. So if people really want to cut water or water use, your best way is to look at your outdoor water use. You can adjust your washers and your faucets and your showers and your toilets. Those are definitely percentages as well, but nowhere near what an outdoor usage is going to be. And then we look at like leaks, right? If you can address water leaks, that's definitely an easy way for people to address or work on their water usage. So where are we right now, right? 2024, we're in what's called a tier 1 shortage. So this is CAP's Central Arizona project. So this is the delivery from Lake Mead. Lake Powell goes to the upper basin, Lake Mead comes to the lower basin. And based on where we're at now, we have a cut. So there will be a 30% cut in CAP normal supply. So based on that and based on where Arizona gets its water, that will be an 8% total decrease in water to Arizona. So who gets affected by this, right? We have the prior appropriation. So the people that have the longest first in contracts are taken care of. So that includes some original agricultural components. It includes tribal and domestic and industrial uses. So they will have minimal cuts. There is what's called an excessive. So if there was excess water beyond what people needed, they had secondary agricultural contracts. That will take a huge hit, right? So those will go away, as well as there's a water banking authority and then the Central Arizona Ground Replenishment District. And so those are ways that we can put water in the ground. And because of this shortage, we will no longer be doing those. So we're basically no longer putting deposits in the bank of water. One area we do it here in Tucson is on the other side of a mountain. There is a large valley, and in that valley is where Central Arizona water goes. And those are Tucson Water has areas underground where they dump and restore the aquifer and bank basically water out there. So that is what it means for this year and where we're at. Each year, the different tier may change. So as we decrease the level in Lake Mead, we will go to stricter restrictions and water from the Central Arizona project. So why is water important to our health, right? So we're talking all this water, this history, but let's talk about like, why is it important, right? Because water is used for everything in our body, right? It's most of our body. It's a lubricant. It makes things move easier. It moves oxygen around. Water is key to our body. So anyone we see with dehydration or kidney issues, we know they have all kinds of problems. But water is especially important for us for health. So we have to think about that with our patients. So how is climate change affecting this, right? It's important for our health. There's obviously water issues. How is climate change leading to more water issues, right? So this is a map that's looking at from 2005 to 2006 based on populations and migration and water use and extraction data from groundwater pumping around the country. And this is looking at in that from 2005 to 2060, what would be the percent change in water extraction from the ground? So how much groundwater are you pumping? And you can see there's certain areas that are going to be pumping a lot more groundwater, definitely in the Southwest, the Southeast, as populations in those areas increase, as water shortages increase, they're going to be pumping more groundwater. So if that's with the prediction model, if we add climate change on top of it, you can see that there's going to be a huge water deficit and increased groundwater pumping over a large percentage of the country, way larger than if there was not climate change. So climate change is exacerbating our water scarcity issue and our water pumping issue. So how does climate, so that's going to obviously stress us from a lack of water, but how else is water affecting health, right? Climate change, we've talked about increases frequencies of storms, it's increasing sea temperatures, it's causing larger storms, more intense storms, and this is leading to runoff of water from domestic and farm and all of these extra chemicals and basically nutrients for certain biologic creatures are being added to waterways, whether it's an ocean or a river or a pond or lake. And those are creating nutrient loading, which is leading to algal blooms and other contaminants that are choking out normal life cycles of life that are occurring in those areas. So we think about it, right? Clean water by itself is a public health issue, right? As humans, if we have clean water, we have less infectious disease and we have longer lifespans. About 20% of the world, though, does not have access to clean water, and 30% of the world doesn't have access to sanitation. So we talked about that fecal veneer, right? As we're getting increased storms and it's kind of everything's running off and sewage and everything's backing up on each other, this is going to lead to more health issues. And we see this in terms of contaminated water exposure to humans, leading a lot of diarrheal illness, paralysis, and we see it in kind of three areas. We can think of it as bacteria. So bacteria may be E. coli, maybe Shigella, maybe Salmonella, Vibrio, Campylobacter. These are all common bacterial causes of waterborne illness worsened by climate change. A lot of these are from flooding or rainfall events and poor sanitation. And you'll see a lot of the poor sanitation, especially in refugee camps. We're seeing this worldwide, right? Refugee camps are only increasing, and the amount of migrations for whatever reasons, including climate change, are increasing. And then even military camps, whether it's in the Ukraine or Iraq, Afghanistan. I can tell you from personal experience, when we were in Diwania in Iraq, we had an outbreak of Shigella. I was talking about those burn barrels in the pits. We could not keep sanitation of 1,100 Marines in a very small area, and we did not have the infrastructure to do it. And about 25 to 50% of our troop went down with Shigella. They were cramping, bloody diarrhea, and they were all on Cipro. And so even, us is like, oh, well, we're a good military and, Americans, and we have access to everything. No, everyone can still be affected. So this can cross international borders as well. And the other groups we talk about viruses, so like hepatitis A virus, noro and rotavirus are common. Norovirus has been linked to like flooding and rainfall events. And this can cause like vomiting, diarrheal illness. And we saw like in Hurricane Katrina, about 12,000 people got infected with norovirus. And this was in the group that was relocated to Houston. So now you've removed them from the actual event in the site. You put them in a different place. Now they're infected there. And guess what? The first responders and people taking care of them got infected. So now, right, you're spreading that disease beyond the actual site of where the problem was, because there's secondary transmission of some of these diseases. So it goes beyond the people that are just exposed. But then parasites would be kind of the last class if we think about that. So parasites, protozoa and worms are kind of the big ones. Protozoa, think of like Cryptosporidium, and that's because it's got resistance to chlorination, which is one of our major water treatment techniques. And then Giardia is another protozoa. Sometimes you'll hear it as beaver fever, but it's from contaminated sewer water. We talk about it in our tests. Maybe you go hiking in Wisconsin and drink water from a stream, that will come up and you'll have Giardia from that. And then worms may affect like 25% of the world's population. We don't see it as much here, but this can cause lung disease and chronic inflammation. So definitely climate change is leading to more waterborne illnesses in our patients. And then we have other effects, right? How else does water affect people and cause climate health issues? Well, here's in Tucson, right? So you can get primary trauma from water, right? People can be washed away in floods, whether they drive across it with their car, or I had a patient once who was found in a Barco Lounger going down one of the washes. He was a homeless guy. And I said, what are you doing? He's like, I'm riding the Pima County waves, man. I was like, oh, I don't think that's the right way to ride it. But he came in and, had hypothermia. We had to warm him up and everything like that. But he was in a wash that was flowing. So direct trauma from floods and rivers can cause problems, right? Then you see this large flooding area. What else? Well, we just talked about diarrheal illnesses. Kids can go out and be like, oh, look, I'm gonna go play in the water. And then they go out and play in the water, have fun. But guess what? Maybe they got some diarrhea a few days later. And then the more insidious component, right? You see all this water, obviously it's not going anywhere real fast. So mosquitoes are going to come in, and mosquitoes will start to propagate, and then they can increase in disease. So we even saw in Tucson, right, our highest in 2021, West Nile virus was its highest incidence that we had had in many years. And that corresponded with a large storm system that we had that summer, which was great for rain, but we just have to be able to manage that water. Another aspect we don't see here, right, because we're not near a body of water with algal blooms, but the Gulf of Mexico, Florida, sometimes even lakes, harmful algal blooms are consistent and commonly caused by now climate change. So we have our increased temperatures, increased pollution, and algae, which is normal, right? Algae is a normal aspect of an environment. It helps keep, it serves as a food for many animals, and it serves as a cleaner of the water at times. But these are basically supersized algae. So now they're just increasing to, ridiculous numbers, and that's leading to problems. In the algae, we're talking about like cyanobacteria and diatoms and dinoflagellates, and all of these can produce toxins. So humans can come in contact with these toxins, whether you're just swimming by them. The red tides have even started to aerosolize, so you can actually inhale them as they dry out and are put into air. So these can cause problems like with your nervous system. They can cause twitching or weakness or even paralysis. Ciguatera is a poisoning we see with like reef fish, but that is an increased and can cause vomiting and pain and neurologic symptoms. You also now, there's some even links that some of these algal blooms have led to increasing incidence of Lou Gehrig's disease in people exposed. So you're starting to see some, and that's from a cyanobacteria. So you're starting to see that we don't know the full effects of some of these algal blooms, but we do know that they're causing impacts. And then socially, right? If you're an algal bloom, that may decrease maybe you're a shrimp farmer or a fisherman, that decreases that. Or maybe you work on the coast and the algal bloom, your tourism industry. The algal bloom, now tourists aren't coming because they don't want to bowl on the beach with all the algae. So now you're financially burdened by this. And this is leading to mental health issues, right? And stressors for patients. So algae can cause lots of problems. So we're balancing, kind of what we used to have. We talked about this with our heat island effects, right? Our natural cycle for water is there's evaporation, all the trees and foliage are producing this evapotranspiration. Water goes up in the atmosphere, it condenses and comes back, it penetrates into the soil, it infiltrates deep, it refills the aquifer. As the aquifers and ground levels come up, we can have constantly flowing streams that create water and bring, basically life to places on the planet. There's very little runoff. Now with our urban cycle, we have all this hardscape. We have more intense storms, less infiltration. So now we have more runoff. We don't have that water table that's being pumped down and down. So now we don't have streams that are going. And we're having evaporation and runoff that's taking that water away. So we've kind of changed our cycle. We don't have that evapotranspiration. So we need to think of ways that which we can address this. So how do we create solutions for water impacts? All these solutions, again, most of the climate change and issues we talk about, these are all known and doable things. It's just about energy, time, and getting people to implement them. But we're balancing the environment, society, and economy with these, and we can come up with an integrated watershed management technique. So we can use climate tech. So things like smart meters, meters that will go off if there's a leak detected, right? If all of a sudden the city of Tucson sees that you have a water leak and you're using way more water, they may just shut off your water because they have a smart detector. They don't have to send someone to your house and look at your water meter and say, oh, sorry, a month later you used, 1 million gallons. Here's your $3,000 bill. So smart meters, things like that. Other things, just in terms of working with recapturing revenue. So water utilities, there's something, if the leaks in their pipe, when they lose water, that's what they call non-revenue water, because they didn't deliver that water. right? Water is free to everyone. Transporting, cleaning, and delivering it costs money. So water utilities are charging you for that aspect of it. But when they just lose it to the ground, they're not making any revenue on it. So for them, recapturing that revenue and working on that helps them decrease their costs as well. And then reduce billing. So we talk it right. This is a climate change and climate health, or disease of resiliency and vulnerability. So people should have the right to water, and they should be able to get water, but everyone has basic needs. But how do we have people with low incomes pay those water bills? Do you want to turn off the water to them? That's only going to compound their health and impacts. So maybe we need to change our rate structure for water utilities, where we increase the heavy users of water and have them pay to help offset the lower users for the basic needs. So changing billing practices. We've talked about the green infrastructure, right? We talked about this with heat islands. So what is green infrastructure? It's the ability to take some of that storm water and water that's running off and go back to the natural cycle, where we allow it to infiltrate into the ground. So this is going to increase shade and cooling areas. It's going to decrease flooding in our streets. So now we're not going to have vector-borne diseases. By getting the water off the cement or pavement or asphalt, you're actually increasing the life of that, which saves the city money in terms of repaving and costs. I mean, we see the number of potholes we have in our city and how much water makes those worse. So if you can get water off the roads, it actually extends the life, and you could reutilize that money for other purposes. And people like this, right? You want a cooler, inviting habitat. You don't want to be on just a straight street corner with nothing but heat and no vegetation. So here's some examples, right? Upper left, you can see this is a curb cut. You can see an example below it where water is flowing in. So curb cuts allow water, instead of just doing our gutters and taking the water and sending it away, right? That's our current mindset of how do we manage water? Get it away, just send it away. Instead, we need to find a way to put it in the ground and sink it and store it and resupply, our natural water cycle. So this allows water to flow into the basins, and if the basin fills up, it can keep going down the street. But it's a way to bring that water off the street. You'll notice the street's a lot more passable. There's not flooding on the street. People can still drive. So it's increasing the surface area for that water to somewhere for that water to go. And kids go and play in it, but it increases. This is actually at Brad Lancaster's house. I don't know if you guys have heard of Brad Lancaster, but we can talk about him in the discussion section. He's a native Tucsonan who is huge into this and has written a couple books on water management, rainwater. So you can actually drive by his house here in Tucson and see what he's done. Other things you can do are like permeable pavements, right? We talked about hardscape and the issues here. So this is a couple examples. This is at the Food Conspiracy Co-op here on 4th Avenue. They built a new parking lot. And if you can see, using pavers instead of asphalt, and there's space between those pavers, allows for water to infiltrate and doesn't have the same sheet flow of water coming off. So it's a great way to incorporate, and you can see they also put in areas with trees. And then instead of a sidewalk leading into their opening, it's a hard kind of compacted dirt. So even compacted dirt does absorb more water and infiltrates more than a straight concrete. So there's alternatives that can be handicap accessible and still drivable, but have a greater infiltration component. Rainwater harvesting, we could talk more about this offline, but just the value of rainwater harvesting for individuals and others. So in a sense, 1 inch of rain on 1,000 square foot house gets you 600 gallons of water. So you can use that as your basic multiplier. So if you're thinking like, well, is it worth it? I got a 2,000 square foot house. For every inch of rain, you're going to get 1,200 gallons. So that 1,200 gallons is either going to go to your property, or it's going to be sent somewhere else and magnify the stormwater runoff. So what do you want to do with that? Here's some examples, right? There's 2 main ways you can do rainwater harvesting. There's active and passive. Active, if you look on this, the house has solar panels, right? Because we want to generate our own energy. Water flows off to the left and hits a tank. A tank or barrel is an active storage technique. It costs more money, but you allows you to hold that water for an extended period of time and use it at a later date or transport it via hose or pipe to somewhere else. Now, these you can store for a long period of time as long as you don't let sunlight hit that water. If sunlight hits the water, you will create algae. So most of these are sealed off, so sunlight cannot get in. The other technique would be a passive technique, which is kind of what the street water is doing. You allow water to come into basins and flow in. So it just naturally flows in. A basin is a lower depression of land that you have created to allow water to sink and settle into that area. This, you can use a shovel, super cheap, shovel your time, you go out in the backyard, you dig a little basin, you'll catch some water. Super easy, very approachable for people. And then you can plant those basins with vegetation. So it's a way to redirect your rainwater instead of going to the street. Maybe you're directing it to a fruit tree. Maybe you're directing it to a shade tree that'll help cool your house and make it more inviting. Gray water. So we talk about like gray water. There's black water, there's gray water, there's potable water. So potable water is drinkable water. Black water is, brown, flush it down, you're pooping and stuff coming out of your sink because you're putting food scraps and blending things in and it's getting to a mess. So those are what we consider black water. Send that away. You're not going to reuse that. Gray water is stuff where it's like your shower, your sinks where you hand wash or brush your teeth, and laundry. Great sources. We looked at what your percentage in the house was. These are great things that you can then send to outside trees. So you can plumb houses or buildings that will flow this water like a drinking fountain. Could the excess water out of a drinking fountain could easily go to gray water. And you don't store gray water. You can store rainwater, but gray water will get nasty and turn to black water. So you never store it. The valve I have here is because there's always a valve with a gray water system that you can turn it to city water, or say you're going to use a nasty chemical and clean your shower. You would turn it and not let the tree see that. You can switch it back to the sewer or your septic tank at any point. The municipal level, this is now back at A Mountain in the last couple of years. What have we done? Municipally, you can do management of your water and allow it to, this is called an effluent. So this is treated water from the sewer that they have cleaned to the point that humans can go and walk in it. You just can't drink it. But allowing this is now increased, and now our Santa Cruz River is running for about a mile from where they release this, and they're looking to release it in other parts of the town. So it's a way water treatment can be allowed. Water now permeates back in, and now we're going to create more trees. Animals return to this environment within a month. You had coyotes and birds returning to the environment that was dry. So this is a release of effluent back into the cycle. So we're looking at these as kind of a sustainable urban water management. There are lots of solutions, and each of these is a part of the solution to create that one water concept in a holistic management. And so here, even from Tucson Water, right? What are they looking to do? They're looking to replenish the ground aquifer, recharge in the Santa Cruz, and use reclaimed water like on your golf courses or schools, as opposed to using super clean water. So it's creating this nice water cycle where we want to have a life water economy and not just an extraction and pump it out of the Colorado River and be done with it. So today we kind of covered the history of where the water came from, about water law. We talked about the compact in the Colorado River Basin. We talked about water usage here in Arizona, still mainly agriculture. Even though we aren't a huge agriculture state, we still put a lot of water into that. We talked about the impact of the Colorado River Basin. It's a huge people and energy and economic value, but we've been in a big drought, and that's causing a lot of stress and issues. We talked about the impacts on human health and water, whether it's diarrheal illnesses, trauma, infectious disease. And then we talked about solutions from a one water approach, where we want to have economic sustainability, we want to have good health outcomes, and we want to help with the environment. So that is all I got. Any questions after you drank from the fire hose there?